The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
What if the host suddenly became the person being interviewed? What if the guest became the questioner instead? Welcome to IN's NDE Radio, brought to you by the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm the person who's usually the host, Lee Witting. Today's show, though, is something different. I originally called Stacey Chase to ask her to be a guest on the show to find out more about how ideas like the awareness of NDEs spread through society. Stacey turned the tables on me, and she's going to be the interviewer instead of me. Stacey Chase is an award-winning journalist, writer, and co-poetry editor of a literary quarterly. During her eclectic career, she has worked for a dozen newspapers and magazines in 5 states, but now lives outside Portland, Maine, and primarily covers northern New England, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Stacey serves as a poetry editor at the Cafe Review, a nationally known poetry quarterly. She is currently at work on a book-length memoir. Her work has appeared in the Boston Globe magazine, the Christian Science Monitor, Newsweek, Poets and Writers, Vermont Life, Yankee Magazine, and many other publications. Stacey, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee.
So now, as I said in my introduction, you're going to grill me.
Grill is a harsh word, but I do have some questions for you.
Well, you're a tough reporter, so do your best.
All right. Well, as a writer with a lifelong interest in paranormal phenomena, one of the things that has always struck me is the consistency of the stories told by those who have had a near-death experience. And this has resulted in a kind of, gentle mockery about having dialogues with God and, quote, going into the light. And I want to know to what do you attribute this agreement or harmony between NDE accounts?
Well, actually, when I first started thinking about NDEs, I often wondered why they weren't more uniform, because I was hearing stories about all the different experiences that people have. I think one of the reasons that it sounds the same when people tell the story briefly is because there's a deficiency in the language as to what they saw and what they did. And going into the light can represent a lot of things for people. I had a story the other day from a nurse who said, who's a patient in the hospital, but she said she had at one time done CPR on a woman who had whose heart had stopped, brought her back. Now, this woman was a musician, and she said to the nurse, "Please don't bring me back if my heart should stop again." She said, "The music I heard over there was the most wonderful music I have ever heard, and I want to go back and hear it again." Her reference that might have been described as the light of God's love for her as a musician was the music of God's love. So I think sometimes it's our brain trying to interpret what our soul has experienced. But there are a lot of differences too. The basic description is that you go into you come out of your body. That's the opening description. And then typically you go through a tunnel. And this is really interesting because the medieval painter Hieronymus Bosch painted a painting of this tunnel going into the light with angels and some naked people, souls passing on through. And it's very much like that painting is so much like what people describe that I think Hieronymus Bosch must have had the same kind of experience. Then typically if you come into a beautiful field, for instance, which is what the soldier describes, there's a wonderful near-death experience, quite complete, in Plato's Republic, about a soldier named who dies, and he comes to a beautiful field. Then other people have described seeing a crystal city in the distance, And in some ways, it's very much like the Wizard of Oz, because and many saints, mystics of the Middle Ages, who did not necessarily have an NDE, described. I think Teresa of Avila had the same kind of vision of a crystal city. Then they might meet friends, or see angels, or some even see Jesus, or another religious representation of whatever their faith believes in. And then, of course, there are dark experiences too. But generally speaking, yes, people say going into the light, because I think that's what they're doing. They're just going into the light.
Well, you actually picked up on two things, two questions I had for you. I'll hit the first one first. You had mentioned the deficiency of language. And so often people who have had a near-death experience claim that they can't put it in words. And yet they try, and believe me,
yes.
As a writer, I'm painfully aware that even the best writing can only approximate an experience. In your opinion, how close or far do words come in capturing a near-death experience for the outsider?
Well, the language is deficient, for sure. Mystics have said the same, and this is the typical way it happens. Somebody has an experience that is so mind-boggling, literally mind-boggling, that they are astounded by it, and they want to describe it to people if they're not too embarrassed or shy about it, or if they're not put down by it, which is a whole other topic. It's really why the IANDS was founded, was to encourage people to talk about their near-death experiences. But then in order to satisfy this tremendous urge, they'll say, no words can describe how beautiful this was, and then they'll talk for hours trying to find the words to describe it, even though they know they're not going to be able to completely succeed in doing that. And I think maybe some of the trying to find a parallel that listeners might understand. People who have taken LSD, for instance, have had experiences where they say, I suddenly saw the world for the first time. I looked at a flower, and it wasn't just a flower, it was the heart of God, or something like that. That's not exactly what they think they're saying. That's not exactly what they saw either, but they're trying to say it, and in so many words, that's all you can do.
Well, now you mentioned something interesting too, and it's remarkable to me that those who have had a near-death encounter almost universally claim the experience was life-affirming and beautiful. And I'm wondering that, in your work as a hospital chaplain who has been at the bedside of dying patients and as host of this show, what would you say is the percentage of people who have a bad NDE? And if God is a loving God, how do you explain that?
Well, this is always a problem. I have talked to people who've had NDEs that were very bleak. It's unusual, and oftentimes it's something that if you're there long enough, if you stay with it long enough, or even if you call out to God to help you, the darkness disappears. One man I talked to described it like being closed in a clamshell, that he was in the dark, going into deeper dark, and being cut off from other people, from light, from love. And it was quite terrifying for him. And in fact, when he came back, he did a lot of things to change his life, because he felt like he owed it to himself to improve, to be more generous and more loving in his life, so that he wouldn't have to go through that again. Other people have said, it was dark at first, and it was scary at first, but I kept looking, and I saw this light in the distance. And so it's almost like the bardo in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's a path that you have to follow, and sometimes the path is longer for some than for others, through the darkness to the light. But there's a really great book by Nancy Evans Bush called Dancing Past the Dark. She, living a very good life, had what they call a distressing NDE, a DNDE, and she's been very, I wouldn't say obsessed by NDEs ever since, but she has certainly been the authority on it. She has a blog and so forth. So if anyone would like to learn more about that, I would highly recommend Dancing Past the Dark.
Yeah, of course, last week's guest, the Reverend Peter Panagore, spoke about the hell he experienced of reliving all the pain he'd caused others, even unintentional pain from their point of view during his NDE. And that certainly sounds like hell to me. So I guess that is a part of the pathway, as you were saying. You had to go through that hell in order to get to the light.
Well, that's right, and part of a lot of the NDEs that people have involve a life review. In fact, that's been a common part of the life and death tradition even long before people started talking about NDEs. They say, "I saw my life passing before my eyes."
Yep.
That phrase is literally true. It's people describe it as being like watching a movie of yourself. The thing that's so intense about it is that you're not only are you seeing and feeling objectively what happened, you are also feeling from the other person's point of view how you might have hurt them, how you might have disappointed them or injured them, even if you didn't realize at the time that you were doing that. But even more so if you were intentionally, deceiving someone or hurting them in some way. I think in a way, jumping back for a moment, some of the darkness that people go through is not because God doesn't love them. It's because they are self-judging themselves from their life review, and they feel that they're not worthy to go into the light.
Well, as you know, many scientists and others believe that a near-death experience is, nothing more than a chemical reaction of a dying brain. What proof do you have that isn't the case?
Well, I know that's been the way scientists have looked at this for a long time. I think what it is basically is the problem that science can't deal with notions of soul or higher consciousness because it's just not. It hasn't been in the purview of science to talk about these things, and as a consequence, many scientists have become agnostic or they just write that off altogether as being nothing that they can know more about, so they're not interested in pursuing it. The thing that makes this ridiculous, in fact, is the many cases of what they call veridical evidence, provable evidence that the person was not just lying on the gurney, slowly dying, but that they'd come out of their body, their soul had an out-of-body experience, and was up by the ceiling, especially in operating rooms, this happens, watching while the doctors try to bring the heart back to life, while they try to start the heart again. And people report, "Oh, well, doctor, I saw you yell at the nurse that she wasn't giving you the right instrument." And another case was they could never find the guy's false teeth because they'd taken them out for the operation. And he said, "Oh, well, I saw the nurse put them in that drawer over there." How would he have known that, being unconscious on the table? The most famous case like that is a woman who said, "Oh, while I was out of my body, I saw there is a sneaker on the 5th floor ledge of the hospital building, outside the window on the ledge."
I recall this story, yes.
And everyone said, "Well, that's ridiculous," because they couldn't see it from any logical location. She insisted, she described it, the color, how the laces were, and so forth. Finally, I think somebody got a ladder or climbed up on the roof or something and looked down, and by golly, there it was. So cases like that, cases where people have come out of their body and traveled miles to hear conversations their family is having, their family members are having about them in the hospital, demonstrate, and then they come back later and say, "Well, Grandma, I heard you say you'd given up smoking, but you were going out of the hospital to have a cigarette because you were so upset." Things that they could never possibly have known unless they'd been there. Demonstrate that this is not just a chemical experience. So the proof is in the anecdotal stories. Very much so, yeah, very much so. But they're amazingly accurate. Now they've tried to design some tests. They've placed things in high parts of the room where a patient wouldn't see them coming into the operating room, for instance. in hopes that patients, if they should have an out-of-body experience, will say, oh yes, I saw that you had some object or other up on the top of a cabinet, on the right-hand side of the room. And then they would, they've tried to set these test cases up. They haven't been terribly successful with that because, it all depends on what you notice. Just like under any circumstances, you wouldn't necessarily be looking for something on top of the cabinet, but you might be very fascinated by what the doctor is saying about your chances of being revived.
Yes, I think that would probably be my interest at that moment.
Yes.
So when you reflect on your own near-death experience, Lee, as well as on other stories you've heard, how do you differentiate between an NDE and a conscious process akin to, say, a lucid dream, or for that matter, even an ordinary dream?
There is something so intense about the experience that almost everyone that's had it does not identify it as a dream unless they are so doubting of their own potential for having a mystical experience that they can't that they can't justify it any other way than by saying it was a dream. I had a conversation.
How is it different?
Well, it's just, you just know that it wasn't a dream. In most cases. Now, in some cases, I think people who think they had a dream, they might have had an out-of-body experience. If they write it off as a dream, they might never mention it because it didn't have that much of an impact on them. But people that talk about NDEs always talk about there's a luminous quality to it that just is very, very powerful. I'm trying to think.
So it has a luminosity to it?
Well, it can. Certainly, if you cross into the light, that's one of the ways they describe this field that people come into. That it's a field, but it is more. It has this glow to it. It's like emanations of God. As actually, when you think about it, we probably all are. There was a story about a woman who saw this beautiful flower growing in this glowing field. She picked the flower and as she broke it off, she realized that it was losing its luminosity. And so she set it back on the ground and immediately was back in touch with the source and revived.
Wow.
So there's that. There's also if you come back with information that you didn't have before, as we were talking about earlier, that too makes you think this was no dream. You sometimes people learn amazing things about themselves and about others while they're out of their bodies. And so that, of course, would also verify the fact to you as well as to anyone you're talking with that this was no ordinary dream.
Now, you mentioned out-of-body experiences in terms of the people undergoing surgery and flying out of their body and looking down on their operation taking place. Both near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences explore what happens when the soul leaves the body. What is the difference between the two, and how do they relate to, say, other mystical experiences?
Okay. Well, there's been some speculation that NDE near-death experience was not the best way to describe what happens. I actually tend to want to defend it as because what we're talking about is ultimately crossing over. Whether you have an NDE that doesn't even involve your health condition at all, people have mystical experiences. They have near-death experiences. They have out-of-body experiences. But the NDE is the experience that really takes you through the tunnel and into the light, or at least it gives you a glimpse that the tunnel and the light are real. Out-of-body experiences are much more basic, and people can even train themselves to do this on a regular basis. There are schools you can go to. There's a school in New York City where you can study how to have an out-of-body experience. And people do this, and where they find themselves is sometimes very interesting. They don't see the light. They don't see the tunnel. And it's almost as if they're in that realm that we would ordinarily describe as being the ghostly realm on earth. They see other spirits. They see possibly other people who are having out-of-body experiences, but also dead spirits, people who are stuck here in this world, trying to figure out something, trying to reconcile something or watch over someone, people who are addicted to something or somebody, and also people that don't even realize they're dead. One example that this fellow told me about, he said, you can go into a bar in an out-of-body experience. Your soul can go into a bar, and you will see dead souls who were addicted to alcohol standing next to someone alive drinking a drink, and they will copy the motion of raising a glass to your mouth. They're like shadows of the living drinker, because they are so addicted to the society and the motions. Of course, they can't get drunk, they can't drink, but they are addicted to all of the habits of an alcoholic, and so they're stuck. They're stuck there.
So it's like a heightened sensitivity, then.
You mean the out-of-body experience?
Yes.
It's a spiritual experience, because your soul is actually out there communing with other souls. You can talk to other souls. Did you ever see the TV show Ghost Whisperer?
I think I saw a few of the episodes, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, these are spirits who, it's fictional, but it's about this woman who had the ability to see these spirits. And they had situations, and she was trying to help them solve the situation and go into the light. Well, they're like Marley's ghost in A Christmas Carol. There are souls that are stuck here for one reason or another, and until they work out what their situation is, they'll be here. They can be here for years and years and years.
Now, given that you're an ordained congregational minister, Lee, why do you think mainstream religions have not done more to investigate near-death experiences in order, to prove the existence of God? Wouldn't it go a long way toward doing that?
Yes, it would. And the problem is that many religions have a vested interest in controlling our relation to God. The Catholic Church, for instance, as much as it honors its saints and its mystics once they're dead and gone, has always put heavy restraints on what they could do and say while they were alive. Churches don't want people to have independent spiritual lives because it erodes their authority, to be perfectly frank. This is true in Orthodox religions. It's true in fundamental religions. They're very interested in controlling behavior. They're interested in community, which is a good thing, because if we all were off simply having mystical experience, we'd probably never be so organized as to cooperatively help other people. I think we certainly would go out and help other people as individuals, but churches have done a lot for society along those lines, feeding the poor and the housing the homeless and providing clothing, and all of the things that they do as social work is very good. And also cooperative worship is a wonderful thing. Having a choir, just making a choir to sing beautiful music to honor God is a wonderful thing. But the dark side of religion is that they're interested in authority, rules and regulations. They're very interested in tithing. Televangelists are all about tithing. All they want you to do is, they'll say a few words on TV and then they'll be into the next commercial for bringing in money. This wouldn't work if everybody was an independent, mystical communicant with God on their own. And so religions are they worry a lot about NDEs because they can't control it. Also, they can't say you only go to heaven if you're a Christian, or you'll only go to heaven if you're a Muslim. because according to the NDE experience, heaven is open to everyone.
Which may explain somewhat my sense that religious orthodoxy is waning in popularity, though spiritualism and other traditions of esoteric thought seem to be filling that void. Do you think it's as simple as the fact that as people, as creatures that die, we need to believe that consciousness survives physical death?
Well, it certainly takes away a lot of stress and fear if you believe that your soul is going to survive when your body is dying. In fact, it's very healing. I've seen many people in the hospital over the years who with faith have healed faster than those who do not believe that there's a God or an afterlife. You would think almost that, well, if you believe there's an afterlife, you wouldn't be so worried about your physical health, but the stress of the fear of death without relief, because you don't have any basic faith in an afterlife, is a killer. And people die faster if they don't believe in God than if they do.
So what do accounts of near-death experiences offer the non-believer?
Oh, it's tremendously reassuring. When they hear stories, and I use this as a chaplain in the hospital all the time, with people that aren't tied to any particular faith, I tell them stories, real stories that have happened to other patients, and all of a sudden it begins to open their eyes as to the possibility of an afterlife. It's a remarkably healing tool, and my interest now is beyond my own practice as a chaplain, is to get other chaplains to start using NDEs to comfort their patients, because it's a very powerful tool for healing, spiritual and physical healing.
Finally, if we had irrefutable knowledge of life after death, if it could be proved beyond a doubt, how do you imagine it would impact society as a whole? Would the fear of death vanish? Would suicide rates go up? Would love be enhanced? I mean, what if we knew that no one was ever really lost to anyone else?
Wow. Hopefully we would be a much healthier society, much kinder society. We'd realize that our values should be more oriented toward the love of God and one another. The same things that Jesus taught, basically. I think suicide rates would drop because the world would be less oppressive and less cruel. I think it would be a happier place to be and a less greedy place to be. People would realize that money is not the answer to all their needs. I think people would live their lives differently, and it's one of the reasons that I would like to see everyone that's had a near-death experience to talk about it, to let people know that it happened to them, and it will happen to them, and it's really a vision of the truth that should be talked about as much as possible.
And what do you think it would take to convince a skeptical public that NDEs are real?
I think it's interesting because people go through fads, they go through ways of seeing things, and you get an idea that's popular for a while. This could happen if not enough people talk about their near-death experiences. You could have people say, "Oh well, that was yesterday's news," but in fact, it's today's reality. And if everyone, the 15 or 20% of people who've had near-death experiences or mystical experiences were willing to talk about it and spread the word, it would become a reality that will transcend religious faith, I believe. I guess we're just about out of time, Stace.
Oh, well, that went quickly.
It did indeed. Did you have one last one, or?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the why now. Why are people now risking ridicule and talking openly about the other side? What's the urgency of now?
Oh, I think it's happening now because more and more people are being resuscitated. You've got more and more reports of near-death experience because our technology, our medical technology, has so improved that now people code in the hospital all the time and are brought back. And so many more stories are making themselves apparent. Stace, we're out of time, and I'm going to have to close the show. Sadly, this has been fun. Maybe you could come back and grill me again sometime. I'd like to thank our guest host, Stacey Chase, for turning the tables on me today. If you would like to listen to the show again or any of our other programs, please visit our website at nderadio.org. And for more information about IANDS, please check that website at iands.org. Thanks for listening.